2 Kings 23. This morning we were able to finish the section looking at Josiah's reforms that runs from verse 3 through verse 25. And right at the end of class, we talked just briefly about 2 Kings 23 and verse 25, where it is about Josiah that we see that before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, nor after him, the Bible says, that any arise like him. And Josiah certainly was a great king, and we have this wonderful testament to who he was and what made him so great. And like we just discussed right there at the end of class, the reason that Josiah was able to be such a great king and bring about the reforms he did is because of how he turned to the Lord with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his might. And that final application that we made this morning, what is it going to take for us to be able to bring about the same change and the same reform in our own lives? We have to do the exact same. We have to turn to the Lord with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all of our might. Everything we have must be focused and dedicated to doing things God's way. That's how Josiah brought about his reforms. That's how we can make reform and change in our life. Now as we keep moving through the chapter, we come to verses 26 and 27, where it is that we're going to see the Lord's judgment. And let's just start with somebody reading verse 26.
Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn from the fierceness of his great wrath, with which his anger was aroused against Judah, because of all the provocations that which Manasseh had provoked him.
So despite all of the reform that Josiah was bringing about among the people and in the nation of Judah, what was still coming for the people? The Lord's wrath, the Lord's judgment. All of this was coming upon the people because of their continued sin and their continued rebellion and rejection. Like we talked about earlier today, Josiah was taking the right steps and doing everything he could to bring about the reforms for the people, but it was ultimately up to the people themselves to determine they wanted to actually do it that way and that they would stick to it and commit with it. But unfortunately, they were not going to. They had shown the habit and the track record was there and the judgment was in place, even going back to what it is that Manasseh did in provoking the people, provoking the wrath of the Lord. And even if you go back to look at the reign of Manasseh to see how it was that he seduced the people to do more evil than all of the nations that were around them. The damage was too much. The Lord's judgment was sure to come. So let's have somebody read verse 27.
And the Lord said, I will also remove Judah from my sight, as I have removed Israel, and will cast off his city Jerusalem, which I have chosen, and the house of which I have said, my name shall be there.
So the Lord's judgment on the people of Judah was that what was going to happen to Judah? They'd be thrown out. They would be no more. Even the city of Jerusalem, even the place where it is that he said, my name shall be there, where the house of the Lord was, it was going to be no more. It was just like what had happened to the nation of Israel, to the northern kingdom. Now it's going to happen to Jerusalem. It's going to happen to Judah. But was this information that was new to Josiah? No. You go back to the end of chapter 22, and at the end of 2 Kings chapter 22, you remember what it is that the prophetess Huldah had told Josiah and his men what was going to happen? Certainly they were told that it wasn't going to happen in Josiah's generation because of Josiah's tender heart. But before that, it was told what was going to happen to Judah. How it was that Judah was going to be cast off, that Judah was going to ultimately be taken captive. And so this information was not anything that was new to Josiah or to those around him. But despite knowing that, what did Josiah still do? He still tried to make change and made all of these reforms. Josiah did not enter his reign or go about his life with a sense of apathy. Josiah knew what was going to happen. He knew the inevitable, but that did not stop him from trying to turn the people back to God. there may be times in our life that we're just fighting an uphill battle. There may be times that maybe in our personal life, within our own homes, maybe it's at work, maybe it's something in the community, but whatever it might be, we may feel like we're fighting an uphill battle and we know the inevitable, but does that give us an excuse to be apathetic about trying to bring about the changes that God would have us to? Absolutely not. We need to be like Josiah. Dedicate ourselves to making the reform, completely being all in for God and for what He would have us to do, no matter how difficult it may be and no matter what the end may look like. Josiah did the right thing trying to bring about the change, and we can work like Josiah to try and do the same. Saw Johnny and then Geraldine.
They had the same opportunity that he had to change their ways and to follow God. But they did not do it. So now then, even though there is a nation today that calls itself Israel, the temple has never been rebuilt. Instead, there is a Muslim mosque right in the middle of where it once sat.
Right, like you say, the nation is there, but it's not what it was. It's not still the people of God. The book of Romans has a lot to say about that. Not all who are of Israel are of Israel once you get into Romans chapter 9. Geraldine?
That just made me think of how important it is for us to spend our entire life serving God and not kind of. I think sometimes as humans it's hard for us to wrap our mind around eternity and around even just life in general and how fleeting it is. And I feel like you can very easily let Satan or just let yourself kind of convince yourself that, well, I've got time to make it right. Like I've got time to kind of not follow God right now and then eventually get on track and then end my life serving Him so I'll get to heaven. And I mean, that's just not, Josiah knew, and he still served God and tried to make those changes. And I feel like that's part of the mystery why we don't know, obviously, if we're going to make it or not, because you have to serve God and try. Yeah,
the only thing that we know for certain is right now. And we've got to do what we can right now to be preparing for whatever may come down the road. We just don't know, like you say. So what are we going to do with it? And so very, very good thought there. Christian?
So, Israel is the Holy Land, but does that mean that still doesn't mean that there's people in it that are like a wolf in sheep's clothing in the actual country of Israel? Like how does that work then if the Israel today is not what the Israel was back then? That's always confused me. So does that mean that people in Israel some of the people in Israel are not true godly followers?
Yeah, so it's, and we don't have time really to get into all of it.
Okay.
But one of the things that comes out in the book of Romans, at least, is that the people that God was using, yes, there's the physical nation we see in the Old Testament, but the focus and the emphasis is always on spiritual Israel.
Okay.
And so that's where, like Johnny was bringing out, and I mentioned in Romans chapter 9, this thought that not all who are of Israel, physical Israel, are actually of Israel, of spiritual.
So technically it's not the Holy Land.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because God's always, and it comes up even in, like once you get into kind of Romans chapter 4, Romans chapter 4 and a little bit of chapter 5 deals with the thought of how it was always that God was looking for those who would seek Him by faith, that it's about faith. And so just to have the name was not enough, that you actually had to be faithful, be obedient there. And so yeah, it's not about the land, it's not about the physical, but who is actually spiritually seeking and following Him. And so if we're spiritually seeking and following Him, then the Bible says we are the Israel of God. Yeah, good question. Jared?
I'm just going to mention the church. Spiritual Israel, and then that's the church, the whole body of Christ.
Yeah, those again who are seeking by faith and looking to do His will. You had something again, Johnny?
I was just going to say, he compared it to an olive tree and the branches that were not fruitful, which was the Israelites. It's going to cut off, and then He grafted in the followers of His Son.
Yeah, and that gets into Romans 11, if I remember right. Like you say, grafting in from the wild olive tree to the natural. And so, absolutely, we can certainly see all of that at play. And so when we look and think about Josiah and the reforms that he's making, like we recognize, it would not have been an easy thing, but Josiah did the right thing, and the people unfortunately chose not to commit like Josiah, and so as a result, they're going to face the wrath and the judgment of God. But let's move then to verses 28 through 30 of 2 Kings chapter 23. And here we're going to find the end of Josiah's life. We'll see his death. But that starts, verse 28, by telling us about the rest of his reign. Somebody read 2 Kings 23 and verse 28.
Now the rest of the acts of Josiah and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah?
So we have this typical kind of closing formula and closing statement to the king's lives. We've seen this throughout the book of 2 Kings, even going back into 1 Kings, you see the same type of thing throughout the book. You know, there's more that these kings did, but we have the history that we have. They had some more history they could have gone and looked at to see more that took place in Josiah's reign, but we have what we need to know about him. And what greater things are there to know than to know that Josiah had a tender heart, chapter 22, and that Josiah followed the Lord with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all of his might, based on chapter 23. Certainly a great example for us to look to and to follow. And then in verses 29 and 30, we see his death and his successor. Somebody read those two verses for us.
In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went to aid the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates. And King Josiah went against him. And Pharaoh Necho killed him at Megiddo when he confronted him. And then his servants moved his body in a chariot from Megiddo, and brought him to Jerusalem, and buried him in his own tomb. And the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, anointed him, and made him king in his father's place.
These verses right here can seem sort of like, well, this came out of nowhere, because there's a lot of history that's going on and a lot of background for some context to this. During Josiah's reign, you have the Assyrians. So the Assyrians had basically been the superpower at the time. And this gets back even to the reign of Hezekiah, and you think about Sennacherib and all of the campaigns and the conquests that the Assyrians were making and just taking land right and left throughout the region. Well, the Assyrians, their influence and their power was starting to weaken. And so anytime that you have this superpower that's starting to weaken and the land on the outskirts is now kind of up for grabs, what are other nations looking to do?
Take it.
They want to take it. They're trying to come in and now become a superpower themselves. Well, who do we see based on these verses was trying to increase their influence and their power in the area?
Babylon.
You have Babylon, and you also now have Egypt. So basically, Assyria had been at the top. They're starting to kind of fall. You have Egypt and Babylon starting to rise, trying to compete to see who it is that's going to come out on top. And so that's sort of the background and the context of what's going on. Pharaoh Necho here, he is coming to aid the king of Assyria at the river Euphrates, because now closer to home in Assyria you have the Babylonians or the Chaldeans who are coming in and trying to strengthen their influence. Pharaoh Necho, he comes, he wants to try to strengthen his influence and be able to basically hold it over the king of Assyria that, look, we helped you, now you help us. Well, during this time frame, what does King Josiah do?
He says, you're not coming through our land.
And how'd that work out for him?
Not very well.
Not too well. This has always been an interesting situation in my mind anyway. It doesn't show up here in the Kings as much, but if you go to the book of 2 Chronicles, in 2 Chronicles chapter 35, and if you start reading in verse 20, it tells us something interesting about this exchange between Pharaoh Necho and Josiah. If you're there in 2 Chronicles 35 and verse 20, what do we find that Pharaoh Necho tells to Josiah to try and keep him from coming to battle?
Tells him we're not here to fight with you.
We're not trying to fight with you.
We're following your God.
Exactly. New King James Version here says something to the effect of basically, if you come and you fight with us, you are meddling with God. There's some possibilities here. One possibility could be that this is Pharaoh Necho just kind of adopting the same type of language and strategy as Sennacherib. If you go back to what Sennacherib was doing in 2 Kings chapter 18, one of the things that he was doing there, and specifically in verse 25 of 2 Kings 18, is trying to convince the people that they had come and were able to take the city because it was God's will. They would do that and say, basically, your God says it's okay, otherwise we wouldn't be able to come and take it. But this is a different situation with Pharaoh Necho. Because, as Phil brought out, the fight was not with Josiah and the people of Judah. The fight was with the Babylonians. Maybe it was the case it was still some ploy, but we have to at least recognize the possibility that perhaps there actually was something going on there. Because was Pharaoh Necho subject to the law of Moses? No. Certainly he is not subject to the law of Moses because he's not an Israelite. So you would have had the patriarchal system still kind of running congruently with it. If the opportunity presents itself, he could have proselytized in, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And so just as a possibility, maybe it was the case that Pharaoh Necho was a God-fearer. Maybe God had in some way brought word to him. Maybe it was by the word of one of the prophets that came to him to let him know some of these things that were going on. All of that is ultimately just supposition as far as what way it could be, but we know at least what he said based on 2 Chronicles chapter 35. To mess with him was going to mess everything up. And did Josiah listen? No. And what's the end result? Josiah loses his life. Some of Josiah's men have to come and take him, put him in a chariot, bring him back to Jerusalem for his burial. As far as where all of this is taking place in Megiddo, that's going to be a little ways north of Jerusalem. You've got Jerusalem down here, Megiddo way up here. And if I had done like the full map where Pharaoh was trying to get to the river Euphrates, would have been a good ways further north. And then if you think about where Egypt is on a map, if it was extended out, Egypt would be way further south. So Pharaoh Necho is traveling a long distance, and Josiah, to even get to the point of battle with Pharaoh in Megiddo, took a lot for him to get there. I don't know why Josiah decided to go and fight. The Bible doesn't tell us, but it resulted in his death. And some more about the Pharaoh. Here's some statue of Pharaoh Necho. Obviously not the easiest to see. You can probably picture in your mind what the Egyptian pharaohs looked like because of the headdress and everything else. This is the Babylonian Chronicle. And this is something that will come up again. I believe it's in the next chapter where I have some other things that relate to this particular chronicle. But in the Babylonian Chronicle, it's Babylonian history, and it actually mentions here this alliance between Pharaoh Necho and Egypt and the Assyrians during this particular time frame. Also, to show evidence of the Egyptians in the area of Megiddo, this is Egyptian pottery that was found there, and the pottery dates back to this exact time frame whenever this battle would have been going on, and the Egyptians would have been passing through the area going north and then coming back south. And so all of this is showing these things were actually taking place in history. And in the midst of all of this, the great King Josiah loses his life. But once Josiah dies, once they bring him back to Jerusalem, who is it that they have now made king in his place? It's going to get to both of his sons, but first we see based on verse 30 that it was Jehoahaz. That first they take Jehoahaz and anoint him and make him king in his father's place. But this is where we're going to start to get to the devastation. So far, everything we've seen in chapter 23 focuses on this restoration. Now we're getting into the devastation. Because as you can see, I have this titled through the end of the chapter is just Egyptian control. Because even though there was still a king on the throne in Judah, it was not really the king who was in control. it was Egypt that's in control. Let's look at Jehoahaz's reign. If somebody would, read verses 31 through 34.
Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. Now Pharaoh Necho put him in prison at Riblah in the land of Hamath, that he might not reign in Jerusalem. And he imposed on the land a tribute of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. Then Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in place of his father, Josiah, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. And Pharaoh took Jehoahaz and went to Egypt, and he died there.
Jehoahaz was 23, based on the start of verse 31, 23 years old when he became king, and he reigns for a whopping 3 months. Not a very long time, but he was king for 3 months, and that's more months than we could say we've been king, right? But Jehoahaz was there in Jerusalem reigning at that time. Archaeologically speaking, this is a seal, Jehoahaz's seal, that has been found, and the red is just because of some recreation of it, to be able to take it and put it in a museum somewhere. But that is Jehoahaz's seal that was found in Jerusalem. And with it, you have the reality of Jehoahaz's life, of Jehoahaz's reign, the mention that he was the son of Josiah within that seal. But we learn from verse 31 who his mother was. His mother was Hamutal. We don't really know anything about her beyond what this verse reveals. Her father was Jeremiah of Libnah, not Jeremiah the prophet. That would have been a common name at the time. But her father is Jeremiah of Libnah, and she was the mother of Jehoahaz. But Jehoahaz, we would hope, would follow in the footsteps of his father, Josiah, but does he? No. See, here we have another example or lesson we can take, even as we did with Josiah. But Josiah gave us the positive. Jehoahaz gives us some negative. We can't always control what it is our children after us are going to do. We hope for the best. We can do the best possible job that we can. But ultimately, it's up to our children. It's up to us as individuals to make sure we ourselves individually are doing what we need to do. Jehoahaz, unfortunately, did not follow the good example of his father Josiah, but instead goes and does evil in the sight of the Lord, even like Ammon and Manasseh and whatever other wicked king you can think of. That is how Jehoahaz went about his reign. And it was during his reign, within the 3 months, that Pharaoh Necho had strengthened his influence and his power enough in that region and in the area that he now takes Jehoahaz and does what with him? Puts him in prison. And he doesn't put him in prison anywhere nearby. He puts him in prison in Riblah in the land of Hamath. So earlier on the map, all we had was Jerusalem and Megiddo. Now the land of Hamath is way up here. Reason that he would want to take him way up there, for one, get him out of the land, get him out of the region, but also the Euphrates River, where he was going to aid the Assyrians to fight with the Babylonians, was still even a little further north of that. And then once all of that is kind of settled and done and Egypt is getting out of the region, where does he take Jehoahaz with him?
Egypt.
All the way back to Egypt. So Jehoahaz's reign did not end in his death. It ended because the Pharaoh took him captive, took him out of the land, and then took him back to Egypt with him. And now with Jehoahaz out of the picture, Pharaoh Necho is going to lay tribute on the land, 100 talents of silver, a talent of gold. He's going to get his money out of it as best as he can. And then Pharaoh takes, according to verse 24, Jehoahaz's brother, one of Josiah's other sons, Eliakim, and makes him king over Judah. And after making Eliakim king, what's his first order of business?
Change the name.
We're going to change the name. If you look into kind of what the names signified here, Eliakim and Jehoiakim both both carry essentially the same meaning. The meaning behind both of those is essentially to say that God has established. The difference in them is in what name for God is used. Eliakim, you have El, and then with Jehoiakim, you have essentially Yahweh there, Jehovah. And so you can kind of see that within the name. But for Pharaoh to change the name here, again, it's possible maybe he was a God-fearer, but more than anything, to change the name would have been a sign to say, I have the power over you. Because if someone has the ability to ultimately change our name for all of history, that's someone who has a little bit of power and authority. That Eliakim was not going to be Eliakim any longer because the Pharaoh came and said, you are king, your name is now Jehoiakim. And of course, Jehoiakim is going to have to go ahead and pay this tribute that was there. And pay the tribute back to Egypt. If you want a little bit more about Jehoahaz and him going on to Egypt, we can go to Jeremiah chapter 22. Jeremiah chapter 22, and we can look in verses 10 through 12. Jeremiah 22, starting in verse 10, says, Weep not for the dead, nor bemoan him. Weep bitterly for him who goes away, for he shall return no more, nor see his native country. For thus says the Lord concerning Shallum, and Shallum is just another name here for Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, who reigned instead of Josiah his father, who went from his place. He shall not return here any more, but he shall die in the place where they have led him captive, and shall see this land no more. And so just as it was prophesied concerning him, so it happened. Jehoahaz would not make it back. His brother Jehoiakim is reigning on the throne. So let's look now at verses 35 through 37. Somebody could read those verses for us.
So Jehoiakim gave the silver and gold to Pharaoh, but he taxed the land to give money according to the command of Pharaoh. He exacted the silver and gold from the people of the land, from everyone according to his assessment, to give it to Pharaoh Necho. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zebedah. Okay. The daughter of Hadiah of Rumah, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord according to all that his father had done.
So here we have just a little glimpse of Jehoiakim's reign. There's going to be more about his reign once we get into chapter 24. But at least here at the end of chapter 23, we can see what it is that he does. And would you say his reign starts out in a good place with the people? No. Because what's he do to the people? He taxes them. Who likes taxes? Yeah, none of us like that. None of us like that. Well, Pharaoh had laid tribute on them, the 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold, and the money had to come from somewhere. Jehoiakim at least realizes that, but instead of taking the money from among the treasury or from even his own pockets, which he probably would not have had near enough in his own pockets to make this happen, but instead of trying to find a way to do this without laying greater burden on the people, instead what he does is he taxes the people. He exacts, or he takes the silver and the gold from the people of the land, from everyone according to his assessment, so that he could then give it to the Pharaoh. And as we can imagine, the people are not going to like that. And part of the reason they're not going to like that is because of what he was doing with his own money at the time. Go back to Jeremiah chapter 22. Jeremiah chapter 22. And I guess if I was kind enough, I would have told you to put a marker there a second ago. But I didn't, so you can throw tomatoes at me later. Jeremiah 22. Somebody read now verses 13. Well, just read along with me, and we'll read 13 down through 19. Woe to him who builds his house by unrighteousness, and his chambers by injustice, who uses his neighbor's service without wages, and gives him nothing for his work, who says, I will build myself a wide house with spacious chambers, and cut out windows for it, paneling it with cedar, and painting it with vermilion. Shall you reign because you enclose yourself in cedar? Did not your father eat and drink and do justice and righteousness? Then it was well with him. He judged the cause of the poor and needy. Then it was well. Was not this knowing me? Says the Lord. Yet your eyes and your heart are for nothing but your covetousness, for shedding innocent blood and practicing oppression and violence. Therefore thus says the Lord concerning Jehoiakim the son of Josiah, king of Judah, they shall not lament for him, saying, Alas, my brother, or Alas, my sister. They shall not lament for him, saying, Alas, master, or Alas, his glory. He shall be buried with the burial of a donkey, dragged and cast out beyond the gates of Jerusalem. What type of an individual was Jehoiakim? He was not a good one, was he? He was covetous. He was selfish. He was taking and making people work to build his house and trying to build a beautiful house and then not paying them at all. But all the while, what's he doing to pay the Pharaoh back in Egypt? Taking their money while all the people are working on his beautiful home. And you think about what Jeremiah says in that. Shall you reign because you enclose yourself in cedar? Right? Just because you have the look of a king does not actually make you king. And he mentions to him about the way that Josiah went about things, that Josiah cared for the poor, Josiah did righteously, but Jehoiakim did none of that. And as a result, when Jehoiakim's time on this earth would come to an end, the people would not care at all, and they would give him the funeral of a donkey. And that's what was going to come for Jehoiakim. But at this point, it's still going to be a little while before the end of his life, because Jehoiakim, based on verse 36, was going to reign for 11 years. And then it tells us about his mother, Zebudah. We don't really know anything about her beyond what's right there in the verse. And then we have in verse 37 the character of Jehoiakim. Of course, we could see it based on what Jeremiah said. But right here it sums it up in chapter 23 and verse 37, that he did evil in the sight of the Lord according to all that his fathers had done. Obviously, we can see at this point, things are not going well for the nation of Judah. As we were saying, all throughout Josiah's reign, they had a chance. It's kind of like you have that last gasp. There's this last hope that's there for them in Josiah, and there's this last little glimmer of light of what's going to happen. Can they turn it all around? And now we're seeing, doesn't look like it's going to happen. Things are not going well. Devastation is on its way. Even though there's still a king reigning in Jerusalem, was the king in Jerusalem really the one who was controlling the people in the nation? No, because that leader was back in Egypt. Even though they were still there in their own homes, in their own land, it was not what God ever wanted for it to be. Because the people were not following them, or following him, as God wanted for them to. As we close, let's think about some of these takeaways out of chapter 23. And of course, we've been talking about these as we've gone through the chapter. One of the first takeaways we have is that we need to completely destroy sin and its opportunities from our lives. This goes back to all those reforms of Josiah and thinking about what Josiah did to the idols and to the altars that were set up for those idols. What did Josiah do? He completely destroyed them. Broke them down. At times we're told that he pulverized them, that he ground them to dust, that he spread ashes over them, that he burned the bones of men on them to desecrate them. All of these things so that the opportunity would not present itself for anyone in the future. They were going to have to work very, very hard to get that wicked again. How much effort are we putting forth in our own lives to get rid of sin? Not just for ourselves, but also for those around us. Are we leaving opportunities there? Or instead are we taking the example of Josiah and completely destroying sin and its opportunities from our lives? A second takeaway that we have from this chapter is that we need to give God our all. As we noted with Josiah throughout his reforms, how much courage did it take? How much faith did it require? How was Josiah able to do all of these things? It's because you look back at verse 25. Josiah turned to the Lord with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all of his might. What's it take for us? We have to do the same. How committed are we to making change in our life? How committed are we to following God? Will we do so with all of our heart, with all of our soul, and with all of our might? With everything we have, from our emotional intellect, from our spiritual intellect, with all of the strength that we have physically speaking, how much are we willing to give to God? Josiah gave his all. We need to be willing to do the same. And then lastly, from verses 31 to 37, circumstances change quickly. How much hope did it look like there was for the nation of Judah in Josiah's reign? Things are looking good, right? It looks like finally the trajectory was going here with Manasseh. There's maybe a little bit of up at the end, but then Ammon comes along, and we're just going straight back downhill. Now Josiah comes, and now we're on a good path, right? But what happens as soon as he dies and his sons come into power? Down again. Things can change quickly. In our own lives, how many times have we seen perhaps that everything seems to be going well and suddenly it changes? And it may not even just be something spiritually speaking, but just any circumstance of life. Things can change quickly. Right? All of this is not certain, but who do we know that is certain? Our God is. So how much are we clinging to Him? How much are we trying to be committed and loyal to Him with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our might, to make sure that we're doing things His way and not our way? We can learn a lot from Josiah. Are we willing to be like him and do like him in our life? So that even when our circumstances change, what the end will be for the rest of the nation will not be what it is for us. Even thinking back to chapter 22, Josiah knew what was coming for all the people, but Josiah still did his part to be faithful to God and try to turn the people around too. How much are we doing? What are we doing to be faithful to God and to help turn others back to Him? This evening there may be something that you're struggling with that may not even have anything to do with what we've looked at with Josiah or with Jehoiakim or with Jehoahaz. But it may be something that you recognize as preventing you from being able to say that you truly are following God with all your heart, all your soul, and with all your might. If there's something in the way that's preventing you from doing that, take care of it now. Even back to a point that Geraldine made earlier, we don't know what the future holds. We don't know what lies ahead, but we know what we have right now. Do what you need to do to get right with God, to make sure that you're right with Him, so that you can do what you can to bring others to Him. Whatever the need may be, won't you come as we stand and as we sing.